Hello, welcome back everyone. We are going to continue with another interview with Spencer Campbell. This is a part two from a talk we had a few weeks ago on the topic of God plus psychology equals transpersonal psychotherapy. And the context of these talks are from our deep interest, and I'm sure that many of you share the same interest of integrating in a good way, in a helpful way, this Western dimension of psychotherapy, processing, alleviating suffering in a Western way, integrated with these time-honored traditions, spiritual traditions of enlightenment teachings, and how it all works, as well as tips from our experience for walking on this spiritual path, navigating various traps and potholes of having this enlightenment teaching extracted from where they came from, which was a very different context, into this modern world of Western mind, individualistic sense of I'm in charge of my life, I'm controlling my life, I'm achieving, attaining, I'm getting ahead. The same mindset will inadvertently creep into our spiritual pursuit. Well, one topic, Spencer, so welcome. And also for the listeners, so there's a previous part, but also there are three other episodes that we've done a few years ago on this topic of psychotherapy and non-duality and the principles of Tantra and this wound of love, which is what we all have underneath. Hard to deal with impermanence, with loss. Everything that we love is going to die and everything is changing. And our attempts to find stability in this unstable soup. And all of this will be in a playlist below. But today I would like to tackle precisely this topic that I know we had countless, many conversations about this, on the role of the teacher, the master, spiritual master, teacher, wise man, guide, guru, as it came from the Eastern traditions. And we all understand that the usual ego mind, we understand that in order to reach a certain level of skill or mastery, it's important to have a teacher. Everybody is aware of that. That's why you go to a math tutor and a tennis teacher and a plumbing class. Computer whiz guru is going to help us to set up our applications. So we are all familiar with that and totally on board with that. However, as we are approaching the most important pursuit to find peace and causeless happiness, and the pathway, spiritual pathway, is basically a pathway to God. I mean, there's no way how to go about it, but not put it like that. But in this context, somehow the Western mind has all kind of snags, fears, concerns, rejecting of authority, rejecting the teacher, trying to do it myself. There is something valid about that, or something understandable in a way. Like, as you know from my personal experience, I started early on the path and I sought and I found a teacher and I followed his guidance and changed my life. And after years, I realized that he was not a good teacher. He was out of integrity. He was taking advantage of me and other people. And all of that, his shadows and his selfishness and narcissistic things were mixed with principles about presence and God and working on myself. And so I got burned. And I know many people who got burned. And then I went into, well, okay, I'm going to read books and watch videos and try to figure out myself. Moreover, that the teachings, they say, hey, it's all within you. You are the self. The wisdom is within you. It's just there. So that's what I would like to open. Also knowing that there's a whole spectrum of what is called a teacher, from a non-integrous cult leader to a wise man who had some awakening, but then he fell into some trap of adulation or power over people, or being controlling or getting juice, ego juice. So this kind of teacher to simply a honest, earnest, genuine, wise man who has a good intentions, but might not be a liberated sage, to going all the way to being somebody who has totally cleared his psychic and his body from a sense of separation and is a master, is a spiritual master slash guru. So yeah, without trying to tighten it too much, what's your experience with your maybe past experience and your understanding about the role of the teacher and your experience with various teachers, and also it seems like you were lucky, fortunate, that at some point, yeah, you went through different teachers, and it seemed like most of them were actually very good and helpful. And then lately, last 15 years, you attracted a real master, and you kept telling me all these years, like, dude, that's the secret sauce. The master is the secret sauce. You can't do it yourself. You are just going in circles. And I fought back and I fought back, but I'm much more open. And yeah.
Yeah, that's it's a big question, and I've certainly have been fortunate because the teachers I had all had integrity and were helpful. I think one way to go into it is just to look at our own emotional openness, availability, or reception to what's being, you could say, taught. So even at that level of teacher where they're teaching techniques, I started with Vipassana. So in Vipassana, they're teaching you this technique that you do, that you kind of apply to yourself. And so the teacher in that case is kind of a guide, so an instructor for doing this technique. And then all of the magic was held to be in the technique itself. And then that morphed into,
How, I can stop you here. How was that for you? What were the benefits and the shortcomings of that? Is this an instructor of a technique and the technique is the secret sauce?
yeah. So, I mean, it was in the Burmese style Vipassana. So Goenka has Vipassana centers all over the world. I don't even know if he's still alive. But, so you'd watch recorded videos during these 10-day silent retreats where he would give these systematic discourses on the method that build on itself. And then there'd be quote unquote teachers there who were, you could go and ask questions really if you had questions, and they'd guide you.
Questions about the technique.
They'd guide you from the perspective of the technique. So it never got particularly existential. It was more technical questions about doing this method. And, there was benefits in the method. I think I said in that previous conversation we had that I was trying so hard to purify myself that I just started getting intense fevers and headaches, so I couldn't do the method anymore.
Oh.
And that left me in a state of crisis and also openness when I met Adyashanti.
Hmm.
And he was then the first real teacher I had. And he was also he was embodying the way.
Hmm.
So that was different. The depth of his
The
embodiment.
meditation instructors, because I went to some of these myself, the meditation instructors, yeah, it's different. They had some more experience than me in that technique, but they surely must have had some kind of problems in their life and they were falling asleep and all of that. It seems like Adyashanti is the next level of he was the teaching. He was teaching, but
Yeah.
he was clear, he was free, or he was embodying that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that aspect of teaching that's what they call the transmission in mystical traditions, the transmission of the teacher, which is their own embodied understanding that's coming through, including the words, but beyond the words. And so I certainly had that feeling. It was very striking with Adyashanti. I mean, that's what really got my attention because he'd say these things that, like you are what you're searching for. And it was the energy it was coming from that really impacted me and
Mm.
really got my attention. And so there's that quality of teacher. And then beyond that, and this is to me is the most radical function of teacher, is when the process culminates in full realization, then it's relationship with the master that is the process itself. And so, and that's when things really got real for me. And so from Adyashanti, then there was something that I was needing that I couldn't really define because I was still mostly trying to figure it out myself. I would go up and ask him questions, but for the most part, I was on my own trying to figure it out. And this non-dual approach for me just led to a dissociation from feeling
Mm.
or a dissociation into the witness. So it was very much reinforcing that separation between consciousness and feeling that doesn't exist.
Mm.
And so then I saw these cycles of emotions of my egoic patterning just keep running through without transforming. And I could just sense I needed something more than that, more than just that non-dual pointer, which is profound and Adyashanti is a master of, but I wasn't able to make use of it to touch things in myself that needed to be touched by consciousness.
And
And so,
I can
yeah.
say here something, it seems like, and I know I asked Adyashanti questions too, and I had some teachers that were of this flavor that they are teaching, they are videos, they are retreats, there is a Sangha, he shows up, he's embodying this, it's inspiring, there is instruction. He even asks me questions. He answers me questions with deep love. I felt like with Adyashanti, I felt really seen and really he was there. It was like shocking actually how much present he was, open-heartedly present to me. Then meditation retreats and more videos, but the idea is that he goes home and I go home and I don't talk to him. I don't have access to him. I don't hang out with him. So it's kind of limited exposure, it seems.
Hmm. Yeah, and he actually, I talked with him about this, and he just wasn't up for that level of intimacy and relationship with his students. Uh, and I think part of it was from him was coming from, well, you can't get anything from me. It's you. And that for me was incredibly relieving and powerful.
Hmm.
And I later discovered it really supported my authority issues. It fit very well into my authority issues. I
Meaning,
didn't have to
piece this a little
surrender.
bit apart with the authority issue. Speak a little bit because I.
Yeah, so there was, and this became more conscious later with teachers that had more of a relational demand, but he made it very easy to not have to surrender or submit to him,
Yeah. Mm.
which is very unlike, say, if you watch like the old Kung Fu show,
Mm.
this is more familiar in the East, but there's a very useful trying emotional ordeal that comes up when you're faced with the demand of submitting to the spiritual master or to the Kung Fu master or whatever the case may be. And so Adyashanti was very much not about making that demand. And so it was very appealing to my ego strategy. We're all the same. There's no hierarchy, which is true.
Yeah.
You know, that's an aspect of truth. The other aspect of truth is that there is hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so these things coexist. I mean, even we're in a hierarchical relationship to the source of ourselves. You know, something's beating my heart. That's not me. Something seems to be
Yeah.
living all things that's not my own doing. That's much more profound and vast than my separate egoic experience. And so there's a necessary part of happiness that is submission to that. And so my sense of it now is that the true embodied spiritual master is willing to submit to that quality of the process and is willing to serve as that, as the function of that ordeal, which at times means confronting the student, pointing out things that are very uncomfortable to point out. You know, and with Adyashanti, it was more, and this was again very helpful at the time for me, but more just, hey, no problem. Just point to awareness. You are that already. And whatever's happening in your patterning is not an issue. Just keep
Yeah.
surrendering into that. Yeah, true enough to be said. But it wasn't doing it for me all the way, you know? Like it wasn't meeting. And I, you know, and part of it is I didn't know how to make use of it so that I could relate to consciousness in that way, so that I would allow consciousness to meet those parts of myself, which is ultimately the process. And I saw a few rare beings able to do that with him. That, you know, most of them, because I was very young at the time and starting out, and some of these people that I saw had done enough work where they just needed a little, like, just a little
Mm-hmm.
push off the ledge,
Hmm.
you know, and they could relate to awareness in this way of surrender or submission, vulnerability, and full feeling.
So you are saying that somehow in your case, and I can see in my case, I had teachers like that. It was all good, and there was growth and progress, more wakefulness, more dissipation of patterns, longer duration of being. But there was this whole other bastion of my selfing, of my ego patterning, the imaginary identity that was not roasted. The heat from the fire of the teacher was not going there,
Mhm.
just because he himself was not trying to do that. And also, I mean, I myself was hiding. I mean, I had some stuff
Yeah.
with Francis, and so I would not bring something which actually will bring my most suffering.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bring it to him twofold. One, because I had the pattern of hiding from daddy. So
Yeah.
we can bookmark this idea that this mummifying and daddifying the spiritual teacher, which has it's unavoidable, its shortcomings and benefits. But I was already hiding from daddy as a kid, and now I was hiding from spiritual daddy, Francis, but also because there was this register I was sensing that people were asking these questions that were all within this range of,
Yeah.
hey, is consciousness universal? How do I know it's limited? What do I do with thoughts? What do I do with that? I felt like that I'm confined to this range, and I wouldn't say, listen, I have this, it's torturing me, and I don't know what to do. I wasn't doing that. So I was staying in a safe zone.
Yeah. You know, and I think the function of those non-dual teachers is also to stay in that safe zone because it's incredibly messy. It's really dicey to go in and touch people in those places, to confront, to serve as that function. You know, Adida has this book, God is not a gentleman, and I am that one.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
the awakening process isn't nice like that. It's a house fire in its full, raw, unmitigated truth. And so, in my experience of this progression with teachers that were more and more open and available for actual relationship and intimacy as a reflection of their intimacy with themselves, they were just, they couldn't help themselves but be willing to serve that function. And that became most clear with Satyama, with my current teacher, where she was willing to touch me in places that I was avoiding, that no one had ever been willing, where no one had been willing to tread before. And for good reason, because you know, I fought it out with her, and I don't think it was particularly fun for her. She was just committed to being willing to go through that process. And so that form of spiritual master, to me, it's the greatest function, is one who's willing to serve that. But it takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of understanding of awareness already. You have to know that you're relating to yourself and not an unresolved mommy daddy figure, even though for almost all of us, there is that process and crisis where usually, because awakening is the failure of the ego strategy and therefore all of our ideologies, it's a failure of ideologies. And so that transition can feel very precarious.
Yeah, it seems like what word comes to me is this, or let's say something here. I was studying with Francis, and he would say this. He would say that for him, when he studied with his master, with Jean Klein, he was saying that he had lots of questions, but after 2 years, he had no more questions. And then he had certain experiences and certain shift of being. And he was saying that the most essential ingredient for him, for Francis, was to be a friend and to be close and to spend as much time as possible with Jean Klein. And he would spend a lot of time privately, but he was always giving this form of we're doing yoga together, we were driving to town, we were going to concerts and restaurants, we'll play music together, we'll just hang out, and somehow in that, like, and then he continued to do this for 15 years or so. He was still attend his retreats, and he was saying this ingredient of not just to hear the teaching, but to see how is the master tying their shoe. So hang out with them and to see how they live this life from not being separate. So he was talking a lot about that.
Yeah.
However, you are talking about something else here. There is that plus this element, which the word comes from me, your confrontation. The
Yeah.
teacher is confronting,
Yeah.
is confronting, is not like, hey, you're doing good, yes, let's spend time, you're more states.
Yeah.
You're confronted. And also it seems like it's like Ashanti, Francis, David Hawkins, there are many people there. There are hundreds of people, there are thousands of people who seems to have this more direct hanging out. I mean, there's to be lucky, but also has to be smaller group. You can't kind of confront and getting there in the nitty gritty and the nooks and cranny of one's ego. So yeah, right? You confirmed this about confronting, and can you share a little bit
And
about it?
even that word is interesting because I mean, it's ultimately kind of a joke because the ego is just horrified to be revealed for what it's doing. There's an aspect of humiliation about it.
Mm,
There's
mhm.
so much hard meaning in our ego strategies. We have so much identity around it. But the joke becomes like the master says the wall is white, and you're like, ah, no, the wall is white. I mean, that's like that's the confrontation, is just a conscious description of what the ego is doing and how it's avoiding feeling.
Yeah.
The more you want that information, and I think a huge part of it is feeling through what almost all of us have, particularly Westerners, of our authority issues. This mistrust of authority or the father or source, really ultimately of source itself. And that's, to me, we talked about that. What I think is really fascinating is that all this issue with the spiritual master, we're equally simultaneously playing out with source itself. Spiritual master just makes that more conscious, because now here's a human being who's a vehicle of that, who's talking in your language and pointing things out in real time. Yeah. But that confrontation is ultimately that, just simply showing where and how you're avoiding feeling, or where and how you're unconscious.
Yeah.
Once you start to get a little bit more facility in allowing what I call the bad me feeling, and knowing how to surrender through that, then there can be a shift where you want the information, want to know what you're doing. And then when that starts happening, the process can really quicken. And now you're in more of a participatory, you say regenerative relationship, spiritual master. And that's when things really heat up and quicken, you know? Yeah. It becomes more of a dance than a kind of fumbling struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess initially some of the things we're trying to get from our parents, they play out. So this mummifying, daddifying the teacher. And so there might be some, and I notice in myself, wanting the teacher to see me, wanting the master to see how good I am doing, wanting the teacher to recognize me, hiding from the teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in that way, where we're wanting our egos to be congratulated, to be told they're good. This, I think, is a crisis that everyone has to face, to see how we're relating to the world or to the Maya as this object that we're wanting to fulfill us, instead of its natural function, which is to reflect us, to show us. I mean, in the Hindu duality of Tantra with Shiva and Shakti, Shakti's there as moving energy and form to show us our relationship to Shiva or to Source. That's very different than fulfilling the ego.
Yeah.
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 And so then when you start to want that more, you want to know what you're doing, you want to see yourself. Yeah, that's a very different relationship to this thing that we all have to go through. This, I want mommy and daddy to love me in the form of the spiritual master. Right?
Yeah.
Tell me my ego is great.
Okay, so let's slow it down a little bit before we go into, because I'm really interested to hear in detail the nuances of this. I guess Rembrandt has this painting from the New Old Testament, fighting. Isaac was fighting with the angel of God. They were like wrestling. So it seems like there's this element of this that is necessary. But before we go into that, I want to get more clear about this difference between a helpful teacher, even let's put aside this out of integrity called leaders. We can touch this later, but from a helpful, wise, relatively awake teacher, more awake than me, more conscious, to a master or a guru. And what comes to me also is this, I don't know if you saw, I forgot the name of it. It was on Netflix. There was a documentary where it was this guy who was just a regular dude, who was Indian guy, raised in London, and he was raised in a religious family and steeped in religion, but then he kind of was just a Westerner, and he as an actor, and he decided as a research project to,
Yeah.
remember the name of that?
I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, he basically took on as a project to become a guru, and to appear in a certain way, totally like a guru with a loincloth and with the Shiva's trident. And then he had a few helpers that actually will help him set it up, yoga events and this or that. And he wanted to do it as an experiment. He wanted to take advantage of people. And
Yeah.
this, I don't know, we'll put here the name of it, I forgot, but it was really shocking how he will act this being a divine liberated being and full of love, and he would make up all these practices and mantras. They were like nothing, they were just mumbo jumbo.
Right.
And what to his shock is that people were changing their life. People,
Right.
they were like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I feel like I've done all of these things and I see you, I see your
Yeah.
love, and the following this mumbo jumbo practices, and
Yeah.
they will get more free from various patterns. And at the end, the guy, he closed the experiment earlier because he felt like he started to feel really bad about this, and he shaved his beard
Mm.
and he came like this with a white shirt in his guru satsang, and people were shocked and upset and they hated him. And anyway, this whole phenomena where he was telling them, basically his message was like, you see, I'm not a guru, man.
Mm.
I'm just like you, and you gave all this power away to me.
Yeah.
And and also some of you have changed a lot. You changed a lot and
Right.
you did it, man. It's not me. And that
Yeah.
was a beautiful experiment. But so you see,
Yeah.
but what's the difference between a wise, more conscious teacher and the real master? And what is this master slash guru really, from your understanding?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. That's a good truth to include is the degree to which, I always felt this about, what we've made into the Buddha, say. If you like Buddha statues, one of the qualities of Buddha statues is that they're kind of stripped of any personal specific features.
Hmm,
It's an abstracted figure.
hmm, hmm,
And I think there's a reason for that, which is actually a little sad to feel, is that it can't be us,
hmm, hmm,
in all of our particularity and
hmm,
specificness. And so then it has to be an abstracted thing. And then I put my truest beauty, my deepest heart into this abstracted thing because it can't be here.
hmm,
And I think that there are a number of teachers that play into that abstraction. And so this documentary, I think, was playing into that abstraction where we are taking our most beautiful thing
hmm.
and putting it on another. And then we're still in relationship with that. And then we can have benefits from it. But it would
Like in
be great.
Jungian will be to gold shadow, to project, just like we project our shortcomings on other people and we are triggered. Then I project on this person all my highest qualities, and then I
Yeah.
put this on a pedestal and he's raised. And especially if they die, there's this teaching that especially the guru dies, they get bigger and higher every year.
Yeah. Totally.
Superhuman, and it cannot be me.
Yeah. 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 That, but we're in the realm of paradox because what I've found is, the more I surrender through this process, the more I allow all the ridiculousness of myself and my ego and all my feelings and let presence into it and feel it transformed by presence through my relationship with Satyama, the more I feel myself as the same one she is. And so then the paradox is like with this growing feeling of sameness, there's actually more gratitude.
Hmm,
Like it's like the greatest gratitude that she was willing to serve that function to reveal to me my true self.
hmm,
And so then it feels like it keeps going in this growing experience of sameness and also devotional love and gratitude
mhm.
coexisting.
Yeah.
you know. Um, yeah, so it would be interesting to see what would happen in the documentary if it kept progressing,
Mm.
and um, beyond the abstraction, beyond relating to the other in that form of abstraction.
But using the Buddha statue metaphor actually hit me in another way is that it's an abstraction, yet also it's a symbol to this, that it is not Mihai that is awakens. It's not somebody awakens, it's the self in them, it's the being, the divine in them awakens
Mhm.
out of Mihai. And so therefore, and that self is kind of universal. So it makes sense that now the Buddha is not special.
Yeah, yeah. And that's still emphasizing an aspect of the duality because in the paradox of it, I mean, that's one of the heartbreaking beauties of the paradox is that, like it was Siddhartha, that's the specific being. And then I think he called himself the Buddha to say
Yeah,
it's not Siddhartha, it's this awakened consciousness. And then when you wake up, you just wake up into the Buddha too.
yeah,
Yeah, and everyone is the Buddha. And then
yeah,
the paradox is, but that also completely includes the specificity. It's inseparable from the specificity, and the full liberation is the liberation of the specificity or the conditioning, you know, and everything about you, all the
yeah.
patterning. Yeah.
You are talking here that as this process is unfolding more vigorously, the false patterning they are burned off, but then there is the specificity of one's own essence as being a unique expression of the divine. So those gifts and talents, and for you a psychotherapist, for me too, or other things, teaching, they are blossoming now. But it's not like personal. It's
Mm.
the blossoming of this expression, unique expression of the universalness.
Mm. Yeah.
But okay, a master, yeah. From I'm going to pull it out of you, but from what I talk to you and what I understand, the way you relate to a master or true guru is that it's more here. It seems like there are gradation. I mean, from many teaching I studied, there's a this overlapping knowledge that they are gradations of masterhood and gradations of levels of enlightenment, so to say.
Yeah.
And it seems like what you are talking about, a master is someone who has really, really deeply the being in them, the self in them, fully awakened in all aspects of all the chakras and all the dimensions,
Mhm.
and the sense of separation, the selfing, the imaginary I, has also completely vanished.
Mhm.
So he, from one angle, he or she stands as an embodiment of the divine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Although the personhood, like let's say with Satyama, is a woman with certain knowledge and skills about the body and acting and choreography. So there are certain knowledge and skills, and
Mhm.
so those are used. They are used in her way to help people.
Yeah.
But it's not she being skillful in all these things. Is that there's this freedom, complete freedom, and she stands as we call it, a transitional object or a symbol for God.
Yeah. Well, it becomes an embodiment of the awakening impulse and the awakening process. It becomes the very embodiment of that. And, I had other teachers either intuit or point to the sameness of consciousness and feeling. But as that becomes more and more real, this is where it gets really offensive, particularly to the Westerner. This is where that saying, I've heard Adidas say this, and it feels very true, is that the true guru offends.
Mm.
and now we're again in very dicey territory because the false guru offends too.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know? But the great offense, I would say, of the true master or the great master is as that process deepens and that sameness of consciousness and feeling is realized, then they themselves become the object of the process or the means of the process. And then it becomes relationship with them that becomes the process. And so then one who's in that state of realization says me and isn't referring to the ego. It's referring to the totality of consciousness because that's what's been realized. And there's fewer things in human history that have been more offensive than that statement. We
Right.
usually can't appreciate it till like 500 years later or something like that. And those are usually the great masters of the world. If you look at like Christ,
Yeah.
offensive his confession was, and also how confused it's become in terms of what it means to be the Son of God.
Yeah.
Just his body mind that's the Son of God, and not all things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get it. I mean, it's not a popular position. Probably now it's safer than ever, at least in America, for the
Yeah.
master to say, to refer to I as the universal being. So, but Jesus would say, I and the Father are one. There was this, and then he ended up dead. And then Al-Halaj, there was another Sufi master in the Islamic tradition, and he would like shout around, "I'm God," and then he was killed.
Yeah.
And
And just personally, Mihai, I mean, I remember the offense of this, particularly with, Satyama, there was just always a deep resonance that was beyond my conscious knowing that was just so obvious that I couldn't help but follow it. But with her guru, Adida, I mean, my initial impression with him was he's just a megalomaniacal freak. Did not trust him, thought he was deluded. And I was completely unconscious of how that was simply my expression of my unresolved father wounding and authority issues.
hmm,
And so this thing when I say like, the true master offends, like he offended me, you know. And I fought that out with Satyama. That was part of this confrontation that we were talking about. A big part of it.
but here to be a devil's advocate, and I still have this devil in me. I remember that even having this within myself, it took me some time to adjust to this way of talking. When the teacher or master or she says I or me, it's not me, the person, it's me as this free, liberated consciousness, which is the divine itself.
Well, it's both and, right? We'd say it's,
Both, yeah.
yeah.
So, but for me, I had this thing like, okay, now I get it that the Atman and Brahman are one, yeah, the self and the absolute are one because it's just one, and everything here is an expression of the one. So I'm on board with that, even has intuition or some experiential taste of that. But then I was like, but okay, but I get it that the drop is the ocean, but there is a big difference between the drop and the ocean. So don't talk to me that you are the ocean.
Mm,
So how would you say to that?
mm. I mean, it has to be true. It has to culminate in that, where it's all just water, and water is water, you know. And it's, I mean, to use that metaphor, it's not completely accurate because it's more like the wave in the ocean, because the drop can be separate, and what
Right.
we're talking about is complete non-separateness.
Yeah.
Wave can certainly say it's the ocean. It's more true in a certain way to say it's the ocean than the wave, even though it's also the wave.
Yeah.
you know, and then it just, I think if to think through it, it has to culminate in that confession for all of us. In the you could say the completion, the non-ending completion of the process
Hmm.
has to be a confession of the growing sameness or the growing identification with the whole as oneself, as all feeling is liberated, and that embodiment becomes true. This has also been interesting to see is that if we want to get more like nerd out on this, we can talk about the stages of life and the difference between the 6-stage realization and the 7-stage realization. So say like Adyashanti or Francis being a 6-stage master, and then say Satyama being a 7-stage master, Adida being a 7-stage master. And
Yeah,
what,
so let's get not in all the stages, but let's say, and as they being 7 stages, and it's interesting in the fourth way teaching, I'm deeply, committed to or resonating with. That's again, they were from level number 5. That's awakened. There's an awakened, the consciousness is awakened, and it's good. It's good. Then there is a man number 6, or the 6th level. However, there's not much knowledge about it. And then the 7th level, and there's not very clear information about the difference between them, but the 7th will be in the fourth way, once it's reached the maximum that can be reached or let go in a human form. So it's a finished product, so to say, although I get it, it never ends, but one has reached completion from the point of view of what's possible here in terms of consciousness evolution. So it seems like you have some knowledge around the difference between a 6th stage level of awakening and a 7th stage. What would be the difference?
I mean, and we can refer to just our experience. And that to me is the best reference because a lot of the language can be the same. It's hard to have language beyond the non-dual language. And that's confessed at that 6th stage. But the felt difference is still an identification with consciousness and a somewhat of a separation between consciousness and feeling in terms of the embodied relational demonstration.
Yeah,
As that gap closes more and more, and this is to me was one of the things that's been interesting is that the the typical being actually condescends to the 7th-stage master and will view the 6th-stage master as being more profound because it looks to the ego what a spiritual being should look like. It's more pure looking. It kind
like
of looks,
detached and at peace and some kind of all of this. I guess there's the established as this witnessing presence, and everything comes and goes. It's not real and it doesn't matter, and that it's unaffected and kind of zened out in some way.
yeah,
Minimal. There's not a lot of emotional.
yeah, and it's mastered any kind of reactivity. So it's generally sattvic and non-reactive and peaceful, all the things that we imagine we'd be like if we become, you know, our true spiritual being.
Yeah,
And whereas the completion of the process, that specialness actually, in a certain way, becomes less evident. Even, they intuit this in the Zen tradition with the observing pictures, if you know those,
yeah,
where, there's like 12 different reliefs of these phases of the spiritual process. And the ones that, towards the end look really special. Like there's just an empty circle where the ox is forgotten and everything's forgotten, just an emptiness, and there's things like that. But the last picture is just an old guy walking through town. I can never forget the phrasing there. It's just like 10,000 masters could not perceive his realization.
hmm. Yeah, so
No
it's not
longer an
true.
identification with consciousness as separate from body and
Yeah.
feeling. And so there isn't an identification with specialness in that way, you know. And so this is what, for me, and spending time intimately with Satyama, being around her in less formal occasions, and there isn't that self-reference of being special anymore. All of that is, there's been a cessation of that. And so she can seem incredibly ordinary sometimes on the surface appearance of things, you know? And so then the perception of what that mastery is something that for me grew over time through the intimacy of the relationship, to see that the great city or the great power is simply never closing off at the heart and no exclusion of arising phenomena or feeling. And so complete availability to touch everything and to be intimate with everything.
It's what comes to me is that, and it's a little theoretical for me, so I don't want to lie here, but the seventh stage, the sixth stage, they talk about the seventh stage,
Mhm.
meaning that in these teachings that I studied, and also from Francis and this tradition of Kashmir Shaivism or whatever, all kind of traditions, tantric, there's some overlap. But there is this idea that, hey, there is the witnessing presence, which is unaffected by all this stuff. Find that and then keep staying as that. And then that's good, but this is just a Vedantic stopover. It's like you are stopping there, but that's not all the way. And the tantric pathway is to, since now you got that, so it's totally safe,
Mhm.
then to realize that the feeling itself is made of consciousness, and the pain and the sadness and the sorrow is made
Yeah.
of sadness, and is not necessary and is not recommended to take refuge as this standing apart, but actually to allow and to find the self in the worst feeling, so to say. So they talk about that. That's the thing. They're saying that
Yeah.
consciousness is that which perceives the phenomena,
Yeah.
consciousness is that in which the phenomena arises, and consciousness is that out of which the phenomena is made.
Hmm.
But you are pointing or alluding to the fact that that is not embodied at that level, and that's why there is this a little bit colder, unaffectedness, uh, and there's still a holdout or something, yeah?
Yeah. In the demonstration, in the actual
Right,
demonstration.
so it's not in the teaching itself, it's more like in the demonstration, yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember years ago, I got a letter or so, something Satyama said that hit me, or you told me, yeah, you sent me a postcard and you said that enlightenment is
Mm.
feeling everything consciously. It's not separating from a feeling or protecting from it or witnessing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then dying into that, you're allowing yourself to arise completely as you're arising. And so there is no struggle with that or resistance to that or identification with that. And so this is to me, and this is part of the process I went through. This is part of the fight I had, is because on the level of language, I'm like, yeah, you're not the only one saying this. And the thing I used to say, it's really embarrassing now to talk about, is I was like, you guys think there's just snow in the Sierras, but I've been to the Himalayas and there's snow there too. Like basically this is, I've heard this before and it's not as special as you think. And it
Yeah.
was really through the process of relationship and the actual demonstration of intimacy. To me, intimacy is such a key aspect of realization, and it's simply the result of the liberation of all feeling in oneself, and that's beyond words and concept. You know? So
I have a limited exposure so, I mean, but I'm happy to have more exposure and get more into this dance that you described with Satyama. But what I get from you is, and yeah, other teachers, they will teach this and that, and then I will ask questions, they will answer this, they will meet me there, it was helpful. But even in my limited exposure with her, I sense that without asking any question, I was experiencing something in my body somehow. It seems like she's able to see the sense of separation or the imaginary I playing out at the somatic structure, energy level, and she's keenly aware of it without me even asking about it. And what was even a little shocking is that at some point I managed to, as she was talking to other people, I managed to move through some feeling or kind of, and then so my being was less contracted, and then she was like, yeah, very good, keep doing that. And there was this kind of Jedi moment, and it was like, whoa, how did she know? So there seems like there's this element of not just teaching, but you are seeing and pointing underneath all the psychology and theories and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so the confrontation could be that is a confrontation, like like face to face with that, both my releasing of the contraction or the aware of my thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And so then I've been as helped by the overt pointing out of things as by the silent allowing of things, just in this natural flow of relationship. And so it all becomes helpful. And it's ultimately all about that intimacy, that inquiry about intimacy. I think Arida, one of his great inquiries, almost like a koan, is just the avoidance of relationship or the avoidance of feeling, as really that inquiry you could take through all the layers of separation. So there's a paradox of relationship because you're relating to yourself. You are seemingly separate from that, from the standpoint of the ego or the me, and then you're dissolved through that relationship into that same one.
Okay. I had difficulty. I still have a little bit with this form of, let's say, devotion and witnessing, especially initially the first few years, observing students being in almost trance-like state, full of admiration and prostration, and that really that was my resonance is very different from that.
Yeah.
And but even as I got more open, yeah, it was a little kind of difficulty with that. Now, this being said, you are saying that what's underneath that is that those people that seem to me kind of lost and putting her on a pedestal, and I'm not talking about her, but like there are other, other
Yeah.
such containers of devotion and seeming worshipping. But what you're saying underneath that is that, at least in a mature student, devotee, there's this felt understanding that she is myself. She's myself in a liberated form.
Yes.
This relation, and then also what was difficult for me is that I would see like, hey, she would tell me, hey, this is not the teaching and the practices.
Right.
It's like, be close to me, be close to me,
Yeah.
and but that is not like, hey, be close to me as a woman or as a teacher, but
Yeah.
close to me. So there's some kind of invitation to be very intimate with myself slash God.
Yeah, like the whole thing of it, like this seeming body mind and the whole thing. So me, yeah, capital M me.
Yeah,
Why she has people say that and do this,
yeah,
so it's clear that it's or this, me. But yeah, that's what frees up, I would say, true devotion. And there's still mistakes in that process because you're not gonna, in a certain way, you'll be cultically relating to the guru until you're completely enlightened. Because until you're completely enlightened, there's still a separation that's occurring. And so, but to
yeah.
have more and more,
Modifying and, mhm.
you know, to have more forgiveness about that mistake in oneself, the immature ego that hasn't even begun the process, like the conventional self, that's what it's so offended by. You know, the you say like the devotee, whether it's of Christ or whatever the master is, that seems like childishly dependent on the master and relating to the master like a parental figure.
Mhm.
And, in a certain way that is liberated in those early stages of devotion, where it's like, I can't do it myself. The me is the avoidance of feeling. I'm utterly dependent on the divine, on source. And I'm utterly dependent on the spiritual master now in a new way, in a way that's actually more profound, but it has still that separation and still somewhat of a, almost like a parental quality. And so usually, and so if you want to talk about the stages of life, I'd call that the third stage position, which is basically all of humanity right now, and certainly all of what's driving Western culture, which is a contraction of the solar plexus in an adolescent fight with God.
Hmm.
That one, the devotee who's in the fourth stage of life, that's in a surrendered devotional relationship to the master, but still some qualities of, you could say, childishness or childish dependence, is really, really offensive.
Mhm.
And I remember this. I think I told you, when I'd go to like Amma and see the people with their little Amma dolls. And I was just so repulsed by it.
Mhm.
But I'm seeing now, and there was something true about that. There's a true criticism of that. But what I didn't see at the time is how terrified I was of that, of relinquishing my adolescent fight, really, I'd say with daddy, just to be frank about it,
Mhm.
source or with God. Like my confession would not have been at the time that I am one with the Father,
Yeah. Hmm.
you know? And so I would say that was what was really triggering my reaction at the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's interesting that even as I was younger on the path, I resonated with Zen,
Yeah, too.
and you go there and you bow quite a bit. You bow to the wall, you
Yeah.
bow to the Buddha, you bow to everybody, and then after Zazen, we'll just bow. And also, I remember at some point I was traveling in the Middle East and I managed to sneak into a mosque and I had beard and all that, and they didn't stop me. So I just sneaked in to be a line of
Yeah.
people and do the usual prayer and prostrating, and I was really careful how not to be detected and to,
I
but
do.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Even I
Yeah.
was like the bowing, and there was something good. It felt good about it, something right. And so even with Satyama, although initially it was something me was squirming, but then sometimes you can bow to her as she's in the chair, or you can bow to the chair that is empty.
Fair. Yeah.
So I started to get more into it and connect to my Zen days of this. There was some kind of natural devotion to the source, to the real parent, to the allness. And I think that's an ingredient. Whether you may not be lucky to find a true master that is willing to get in there with you, because I don't think there are many. Uh,
Yeah.
but still, what one take would be somehow to look into this lack of hey, it's me, and I don't know about God. I was in non-dual circles, and sometimes I would ask them about God, and people would say, I don't know about God, man. It's just consciousness. And at some point, it started to stink to me, that thing. There seemed to be some bullshit. And
Yeah, yeah,
somehow to find what are the obstacles to this, the love of the absolute that
yeah.
is breathing us, and this seems to be a ingredient that is very necessary to transcend what you are calling doing yourself technology.
Yes. Yeah, that doing, I really believe this at this point that the anti-guru or anti-spiritual master stance of the West, it has its origins, you could say, in the Protestant Revolution or Reformation and in science, which, came from a true criticism, but then I think is unconsciously now in all of our systems. I think that's limiting the spiritual progress of the West more than anything else.
Yeah.
It's a profound blind spot. And then we take what is the offense of the master or to the ego, the offense of submitting to source. We take that to be true simply because it doesn't feel good in our systems. And collectively, there's a lot of support for that stance.
Hmm.
So I think when that starts to open and when more consciousness comes to that, it's going to really quicken the spiritual transformation of the West. That's my feeling about it. And that was
Yeah.
certainly true in my own life. I remember, when I came to Satyama, still with this fight, this adolescent fight with Source. And again, we can be clear that we're not talking about a separate God. Yeah, just a little footnote in there. Yeah. But still playing on that fight. I remember we were doing a sweat lodge at the men's site, and we were reading in the Adidas community this thing called the Hymn of the Master. That's all about devotion. And I just remember like struggling with this fight and knowing that I was essentially terrified. It was becoming more and more conscious how terrified I was to submit to anything.
Hmm.
Um, and then to, like you're saying, the pleasure of bowing. I remember, okay, I'm just going to bow and let go. And
Hmm.
it was amazing how much emotion was released.
Hmm.
Just so much, so many years of
Yeah.
pain, heartbreak, and struggle.
Hmm.
That fear-based stance of that toe-to-toe-ness with God, that fight with reality, that was essentially unresolved parental wounding. And I remember it just
Yeah.
all like broke free, and then there was just a flood of emotion, and it's very helpful.
And it's interesting, that's the first step in AA. That's the first step is
Yeah,
I can't do this, man. I'm fucked.
yeah,
And I surrender to a higher power. This first step is, and I get it that they can be taken as some God out there and then it has problems, but still, even that, an imagined God out there, it's better than my ego trying to manage the imaginary ego trying to manage the suffering that it creates.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love how they put that in there.
Mm.
Those like there's such incredible truths like that. So yeah, I'm powerless to do it myself. I've realized my life's become unmanageable. I
Yeah,
mean, the joke of that, I think we talked about that, is that it's always been unmanageable. It's been an illusion that the ego is managing anything.
right.
And, periodically life will do a very good job of showing that in the form
Yeah,
of.
it seems like we are more receptive when we are stuck and suffer.
Yeah,
But yeah, there was this in some teaching I was studying. It's like there's a daddy that is driving the car, and the ego is like a little kid having a mock will.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes it seems like you're turning it because
right,
the daddy driving the car is turning the same way.
right.
At a certain point, the wheel starts working.
And I guess, yeah, we are coming towards the end, but I don't want to go into it with you now, but it's good for the listeners that we are talking here to having this kind of dynamic that is helpful with the spiritual master, which actually there's the source behind the seeker and the source behind the master, and it's not this God out there. So it's God out there and God in there, God everywhere, and this is in a context of being in the context of a healthy, integrous, clean, helpful master. And it's a whole discussion that I won't go into, you, Spencer, but there's a whole warning here because, and that's what I learned a lot from David Hawkins. He was saying that, hey, I'm teaching enlightenment here, but it's my duty as a teacher to warn you all that there are many wolves in sheep clothing, and the seeker is gullible and naive and all these projections. So it's important to be discerning about this. And there are teachings around that. I think I will have, I did a whole series of 6 parts, how to discern while being asleep and not being able to discern, but having a cheat sheet a little bit, how to see like a real guru is not going to do that, is not going to do this, is not going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so tricky, Mihai.
Naive.
It's so tricky because including all of that, including, say, like the perfect integrity of the spiritual master, there's still a crisis where you come up against, am I going to trust me and my ideology or open to something that's still unknown, but I can feel? And I think in that space, everything can happen. I think in that space, people surrender into the false master. If you're lucky, you surrender into the true master. And I wish there was an easy prescription. And, you know, what we're talking about, it's not like you can go to the supermarket and just pick yourself up a guru, you know?
Yeah.
And this is, you know, why when I work with people, you can have, I don't know if I can sell it the same, but at least essentially similar quality in the emotional exploration of your relationship with presence and source. You can explore it right now. You know, am I in a surrendered relationship to what's living me and what's breathing me? What's my emotional relationship to reality? Is it trust or mistrust? Do I feel like I'm loved by all arising phenomena? I mean, all of these questions that are actually deeply emotional questions can be explored with presence itself. You know, and I would say that that's in a certain way the essence of guru yoga. It's just facilitated and intensified and you know, I'd say most optimal in relationship to the human master, I think for obvious reasons. But you can have that same inquiry with, I remember, I think Amodama, she talked about how India became her guru. India's kind of like that because there's such, you know, centuries and centuries of spiritual practice and realization. It's just steeped in it. And then it's the throbbing chaos of India. It's that principle is very powerfully there. If you've ever, I don't know if you've been to India, but you know, I don't know anyone who's been there that hasn't gone through great highs and great lows. And then she, for whatever reason, started to get an inkling of submitting to that process. And then for her, her confession now is that India served as her guru.
Yeah.
So that's still that conscious process.
Yeah. So here, I mean, that's a maybe final idea is that people that come to me and they say, and I used to say this too, hey, yeah, but you know, the energy field of Ramana Maharishi is ever present, and or Jesus Christ is ever present. So why do I need to find a living master? Because I can connect to that. And yeah, theoretically, yes. And there are few cases where this happens, but practically, I think we are so much ignorance and so much self-deception and delusion and tight knot that I like what you said. You said, or somebody said, that, yeah, you know, Ramana Maharishi is a great guru, but dead gurus can't kick your ass, your ego ass, right? Who said that?
Harida.
Yeah, so that is like, I can see
Dead
that.
gurus can't kick ass. Yeah. Yeah,
Especially if we are in a, let's say, position of leadership, like you and me, and teaching and this or that. I end up being more like the person in charge in teaching, and this
yeah,
is tricky. This is tricky. It's very important, especially for people listening that are teachers or therapists. But to be honest, it's good to have a little supervision, man, a little somebody wiser
yeah.
to and to be open and humble and to just take it. Like, yeah, she's right. She sees this, she's right. Yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Um, it's something, can't think of it now, but yeah, maybe that's good for now.
Yeah, and we would like to continue with this. There are kind of topics that we just touched upon, but they're worth getting more in depth about this, the relationship with feeling and how to rewire this relationship with feeling and presence and the role of the breath so that it leads us to not just, oh, there's this feeling that I'm trying to witness, but to end up towards the pleasure of being, and then
Yeah.
this thing should be pleasurable,
Well,
even
then the
suffering.
natural, yeah, the natural love response as that unconditional enjoyment of presence grows is, you could say, the cause of devotion or the
Yeah.
actual devotion, and to allow that to occur. So, it's not just abstract consciousness we're relating to in our minds, but it's a bodily emotional process that's alive in our own breath and, is a feeling experience, bodily emotional feeling experience. So, yeah, I do include that.
All right, Spencer, thank you for sharing all your wisdom and thank you for nudging me all these years out of my attempt to just figure it out myself and nudging me,
Yeah,
sharing teacher with me. And
letting yourself
yeah,
be moved. Yeah, and I know that feeling and
all right.
the
Thank
truth.
you.
Very good, Mihai. Yeah.